Hello, welcome to the Vipers Fantasy Network. You know it's NFL free agency, so we're talking NFL free agency. Yes, we're going into part 2 of the Vipers free agent frenzy breakdown. We've got some lower end type names here to kind of kick off the show, but we saved some big names. We talked about some big names in part 1, so let's talk about the names here in part 2. And it's time for a little road trip. Load them up. Let's get on the Gus bus and let's head to Los Angeles. Gus Edwards is signing a 2-year deal worth $6.5 million to reunite with former Ravens offensive coordinator Greg Roman. Perhaps the $3.37 million guaranteed and the incentives was enough to entice him to go back to playing in a Greg Roman type offense. Now, I'm not fully sure anyone actually willingly goes to play for Greg Roman, but hey, each to their own. Edwards, he has been part of one of the most prolific rushing attacks in the NFL over the last 6 seasons, producing 3,395 of the Ravens' 17,484 rushing yards. That is the most amongst Ravens running backs. We know that Lamar Jackson is a top option there when it comes to the running game in Baltimore, but Edwards, he was the most consistent runner, especially between the tackles. We're talking about guys like Mark Ingram, J.K. Dobbins, Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell, Kenyon Drake, Latavius Murray, Devontae Freeman. He was there for a while. The list goes on and on and on. And there's been one constant, and that was Gus Edwards. Now, we know Jim Harbaugh, he's going to love himself some Gus Edwards, not to mention those 13 rushing touchdowns from a season ago. That was tied for the third most. Now, Edwards, he did average just 4.1 yards per carry last season, which was the first time in his career that he was held under 5 yards per carry. As an undrafted free agent out of Rutgers, it's quite the feat that he and Nick Chubb are the only running backs in NFL history to start their careers with 3 consecutive 700-plus seasons while averaging 5 yards per carry. Now, unfortunately, the cons, they outweigh the pros when it comes to Edwards in Los Angeles. Sure, Jim Harbaugh, he's a run-first kind of guy. And Edwards, he did play for Greg Roman previously. But this Chargers offensive line, it was downright offensive at times last season, ranking dead last in run blocking. Now, Edwards, he doesn't offer much upside in the passing game, and I'd expect the Chargers to add another running back in this year's draft class. At best, Edwards is that bridge-type running back there for the Chargers and a flex option later on the season when your team is taking a bit of a hit there when it comes to the Band-Aid Brigade. Let's call this a C. The signing, for me, is saying, you're basic. Now, Sam Darnold heading to Minnesota, listen, 1 year, $10 million to serve as the Vikings' bridge quarterback. Those around the league, they all believe that the Vikings are going to select a quarterback in that first round, either with pick number 11 or attempt to move up the board and draft a franchise quarterback of their own. Darnold, he's that break the glass in case of an emergency type quarterback that Minnesota had to turn to after Kirk Cousins left them for Atlanta. Darnold essentially played one game last season. I wouldn't even call it playing a game or even a game in general. 16 of 26 for 189 yards and a touchdown. That's who Sam Darnold is throughout his career. Look at his completion percentage over those 6 years, 59.8%. He has failed to complete at least 62% of his passes in any of his 6 seasons. And over the last decade in the NFL average for completion percentage, 63.9%. You see where I'm going here? The Sam Darnold signing, it is below average at best. If you were comparing Darnold to, say, Jaron Hall, I mean, both are 26, and they are 5 years apart. Again, I guess that is kind of an upgrade, but I don't think that Darnold is going to offer you anything that Nick Mullins can't, or even Joshua Dobbs for that matter. And Joshua Dobbs, he's like a rocket scientist, so you can at least say that when it comes to trivia. What can you say about Sam Darnold? What, he looks like the villain from the Invincibles there against the Incredibles? No, this is below average, and that's, I don't even know what else to say when it comes to this deal, really. Now, Justin Jefferson, he may be quarterback proof, but Sam Darnold, he's the kind of quarterback to put that theory to a test in Superflex leagues. Let someone else draft Sam Darnold. As for Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, they're all going to take hits as far as their fantasy value is concerned. That's probably why we're hearing Justin Jefferson in trade talks right now. There's a reason he wants $30 million. If I have to play with Sam Darnold, I want at least $30 million myself. When we look at this, as far as value goes, Jefferson, he's going to fall behind Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and most likely, for me already, Amon-Ra St. Brown. When we're talking about our fantasy football wide receiver rankings, this is a D-, as it basically affects everybody, all kinds of multitudes of assets here when we talk about fantasy football. Now, another kind of, it's a signing, but is it really? It's Jacoby Brissett heading to New England. New England is most likely to select a quarterback with that second overall selection in April's draft after trading away former first-round pick McCorkle Jones prior to the legal tampering phase of the NFL calendar. Brissett, he's signing a one-year deal with the Patriots, which means he's going to have a chance to compete with a rookie quarterback for starter reps early on in the season. But he's also got an opportunity to serve as a mentor and be a solid backup quarterback. He's kind of a locker room type guy. It has to say something when a team would rather pay Jacoby Brissett than trade for Justin Fields. But that is a conversation for another time, another day. Brissett has proven that he can be a solid starter when given an opportunity, when called upon. However, this Patriots offense, it is bad. There's nothing here to even like. Outside of Ramondre Stevenson and the newly signed Antonio Gibson, there isn't anything to get excited about. Hunter Henry, he's returning, as too is Juju Smith-Schuster, Kendrick Bourne, Demario Douglas, Tyquan Thornton, Jalen Reagor. Only Douglas here is the guy who has any kind of fantasy value amongst the wide receiver group. For the Patriots, this signing is, a solid B for Brissett. Brissett is a veteran quarterback. He's going to bring that veteran presence to that quarterback room. And at worst, he's going to serve as a mentor for a potential franchise quarterback while providing starter reps as needed. He's a locker room guy, and you need locker room guys, especially when you have a new head coach and you're trying to convey that head coach's message to the rest of the team. Right now, before the Patriots are even on the clock, this quarterback room consists of Jacoby Brissett, Bailey Zappi, and Nathan Rourke. Those are the only quarterbacks there that are under contract currently. As for fantasy, this is C-. Even if Brissett can return to, say, that form that had him slinging it around in Cleveland a couple of seasons ago, there simply isn't enough help on this roster to get him to be anywhere close to fantasy relevant. Now, a player who has some fantasy relevancy, and thanks to a huge plot twist, the Cincinnati Bengals, they did not release Joe Mixon. Instead, he was traded to the Houston Texans for a 7th-round pick. That means they basically gave him away just to get him off their roster. This former Cat, he lands on his feet, going from Joe Burrow to C.J. Stroud in a potent Texans offense. Cincinnati, moving on from Joe Mixon, has long been rumored for a couple seasons now, and with the signing of Zach Moss, it was inevitable. At 27 years of age, Mixon brings with him to Houston 6,412 rushing yards with a career average of 4.1 yards per carry. He also caught 283 passes for an additional 2,139 yards and a combined 62 touchdowns throughout his career. Over the last couple seasons, the efficiency numbers are in his carries. They haven't been great, but he did finish last season with over 1,000 yards rushing and 9 touchdowns on the ground. Now, some of those numbers are a little bit inflated due to some games there and here and there, but hey, when it's all said and done for fantasy, we don't ask how, we ask how many. Well, actually, we do ask how. Analytics kind of plays a whole part in that. Houston, they have been linked to the running back market all offseason. They were finalists for the Saquon Barkley and his services, which they lost out to with Philadelphia. Mixon, not a bad consolation prize, along with Stroud and Nico Collins and Tank Dell and the recently re-signed Dalton Schultz. This forms one of the more exciting offenses ahead of 2024. You have to love what DeMeco Ryans is going to do. And we know that this defense, it's going to get the ball back to this offense. Will Anderson, hey, guess who's going to play bookend opposite of you here? It's going to be Danielle Hunter. This team is making moves in free agency. A good defense is going to lead to good offense. And what that means, more touches for Joe Mixon, a running back that when healthy, he's guaranteed to have over 250 touches. Now, buyer beware for fantasy. When we look at Slowick's type outside zone run scheme here that he's going to deploy here in Houston, it's not exactly a great fit for the Pro Bowl running back. When asked to run in a zone concept there has been a significant decrease in Mixon's production, in which he averages just 3.35 yards per carry versus that 4.45 yards per carry when running gap man concepts. It is an eerily similar type dip than what we saw from Dameon Pierce. I'm not saying Mixon's going to be Pierce. I'm just saying buyer beware. Even with that risk associated in this offensive scheme, Mixon, there's no competition for touches in this Houston backfield, which means Mixon remains a high volume back, which is great for fantasy. So, hey, it's 6 of one and half dozen of another, so to speak. Houston, they got what they were searching for, and the Texans offense further improves on paper. This is a B+. Now, Darnell Mooney, he is joining Drake London and Kyle Pitts in Atlanta. Mooney gets a 3-year deal with $39 million, with $26 million of that guaranteed. Hey, mama, don't let your babies grow up to be running backs. Let them be wide receivers, because even if they're bad, they're getting paid better than good running backs. Now, Mooney, he's going to add a certain element to this Falcons offense that they don't have, and that is that need for speed. We're talking about a player who can really stretch the field. 4.38 speed here, which is going to, in turn, open things up underneath for Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Well, Mooney has had a couple lackluster type seasons in a row. If you go back to 2021, that season, you'll find a receiver that saw 140 targets there, hauling in 80 of them for 1,055 yards. But we can't really hold that against him. I mean, look what he was working with there in Chicago. It wasn't a good passing offense. It was run first. Justin Fields is kind of learning on the job. And right now, Justin Fields can't even get a starter's job. So that should say, well, you know what? Again, another day, another story altogether. With all the weapons the Falcons have in place, and with the newly signed Kirk Cousins orchestrating this offense, Mooney can once again be a threat for a Falcons team that was in desperate need of a true number 2 wide receiver. We're talking about guys that they were using like Mac Hollins and Olamide Zaccheaus. I mean, these are not guys that you're going to trust opposite of Drake London. These are guys that are not going to command the attention of a defense. Mooney, he's going to command the attention of the defense. Defensive coordinators are going to have to game plan around Mooney's speed. Now, the competition for targets is going to lower the ceiling for Mooney for fantasy purposes. Mooney's value actually is set to trend upwards. Now, I expect this Falcons offense to be one of the top units for the next 3 to 4 seasons, which only helps Mooney. With that, Mooney's value to the moon, baby, to the moon. Right now, I have Mooney as a solid wide receiver 3, but I wouldn't be surprised when he comes in there and gives you wide receiver type 2 numbers there from week to week. In best ball, I love him even more, especially with that speed, especially with that ability to score at any given play each and every week. This is a great signing for the Falcons as they continue to build towards that NFC South championship. And for fantasy managers that have been waiting for the return on an investment there when it comes to Darnell Mooney, you know, the ones that traded for him after that big breakout season and then kind of, you know, coincidentally have been disappointed the last couple seasons. The talent, it has always been there, but now he gets an opportunity to turn that promise into production with Kirk Cousins and the Falcons. Let's give this a B. Now, maybe one of the worst kept secrets there in fantasy football, maybe one of those kind of connect the dots things. Everybody had Derrick Henry going to the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, that's kind of what we had hoped for. The king of the flock, so to speak. Well, guess what? You get what you wish for here. 2-year deal worth $16 million that could be up as much as $20 million with the incentives. The best part of this deal for Henry's cap, $9 million. That is guaranteed in the first year. No team has ran the ball more effectively than the Ravens have over the last 7 or 8 years. And arguably, no back has balled harder than Derrick Henry over that same period. During Henry's tenure there in Tennessee, the bruising back has carried the ball more than 2,000 times for just over 9,500 yards and 90 rushing touchdowns. Henry also has an NFL record 6 games in which he has ran for at least 200 yards on the ground. The 2020 Offensive Player of the Year also happens to be a 4-time Pro Bowler and a 2-time rushing leader. Last season, the combination of Lamar Jackson, Gus Edwards, Keaton Mitchell led the NFL with 2,661 rushing yards, averaging 156.5 yards per game. Add Derrick Henry to that, and I don't even know how defensive coordinators are going to game plan of what Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson are about to do to you. They're about to run wild on you, brother. What do? You stick 10 guys in the box and man up on Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews and hope whoever else the Ravens stick out there on the field can't catch the ball? I mean, that might be what you have to do to slow this offense down. Henry has produced 5 1,000-yard seasons over the last 6 seasons, and he has seen at least 300 carries in 3 of the last 5 years. We've been looking for that drop in Henry's production for the last few years now, And even with an off year, I mean, Henry struggled there at the beginning of the season, but guess what? He still finished with 4.2 yards per carry. He still finished with 1,167 yards. He still had 12 rushing scores. His explosive run rate was 9th in the league. His yards after contact per attempt, 11th. Even as a pass catcher, the last 2 seasons, he truly has been a threat, finishing 11th and 14th respectively in yards per route run, and 7th and 1st last season in yards per route run per fantasy points data. So that's kind of a big deal there. The Ravens, you all think about Derrick Henry's this big bruising back, but guess what? He's been catching the ball out of the backfield too, and we love that in fantasy. It wouldn't shock me. It would not shock me if Derrick Henry somehow finishes the RB1 in fantasy next season. So with all this, Henry's value, it increases there with this move to Baltimore. A much better offense altogether than the one he played with there in Tennessee. And they might actually be more effective when it comes to running the ball. This is an A- type signing for the Ravens fans. For fantasy managers, get excited. If Henry is out there scoring 10 touchdowns or more per season every year since 2018, how many do you think he's going to get on a team in which saw Gus Edwards score 13 times last season? I mean, he could be in line for 20 touchdowns this season, people. 20 touchdowns. Ooh, I got to take a breather here. I mean, we are pounding these out here really quick. Now, let's talk about the Bengals. Let's talk some tight ends because we haven't talked tight ends. We didn't talk any tight ends when it came to part 1 of this whole thing. So let's talk about the Bengals going back to the bargain bin, doing what the Bengals do for the tight end position, and then assign Mike Gesicki to a 1-year deal worth $3.25 million. We know the Bengals love to go bargain bin shopping. They go to golden bins. They go to wherever they need to go. Hayden Hurst, Irv Smith Jr., CJ Zalma, Gesicki, he's just the latest to that list. Now, I wish I could say that this whole signing has me excited. We've seen some of these tight ends in previous years outside of Irv Smith Jr. return an investment on the signing for the Bengals. And Gesicki is probably just as good as any of them. He's probably twice the athlete, let's be honest. But at some point, you are what you are. If it sounds like a duck, if it acts like a duck, it's probably going to be a duck, or in this case, a Mike Gesicki. The former New England Patriot, Miami Dolphin, he has 2,861 career receiving yards, 20 touchdowns, 260 receptions over a 6-year career that has included 98 games. Perhaps the production has never shown up, but game in and game out, Gesicki has been there with his best season coming in 2021, where he caught 73 of 112 targets for 780 yards. Gesicki provides Joe Burrow with a big target who, since 2018, he ranks 3rd in tight window receiving yards with 478. And yes, that is an actual thing on next-gen stats. Why is this even worth mentioning? Well, since Joe Burrow arrived in Cincinnati, the Bengals tight ends have combined for the 2nd fewest receiving yards on tight window throws with just 126 yards between all of them. Gesicki's addition should be a safety blanket of such for Burrow, if not anything else. I do hold out hope that by saving at the tight end position, again, this allows management a little bit of flexibility and working a long-term deal with some other pass catchers who I will not mention at this time. As for fantasy, Gesicki, he has potential. But this could also be a trap. After all, many people were high on Gesicki when he went to New England, as many were high on Irv Smith Jr. last offseason when the Bengals signed him, considering how the Bengals have produced quality tight ends over the last few seasons. Now, I'm willing to take a shot on Gesicki as my tight end 2 in fantasy, assuming I already have an established starter on my roster where the risk of adding him is essentially nullified here. Overall, this is a solid team move for the Bengals, but nothing more than average when it comes to fantasy, earning a grade of let's call it a C. I mean, it's average right there. The Miami Dolphins, they also dipped their toes into the tight end market, signing former Titan Patriot Falcons tight end Jonnu Smith to a 2-year deal worth $8.5 million. The move comes as the Dolphins look to add anything that they can to give you any kind of production for the tight end position, as Durham Smythe was the top tight end last season, hauling in 35 passes for just 366 yards. Last season in Atlanta, there were times where Jonnu Smith actually looked like he was the better tight end option to Falcons quarterbacks as he trailed Kyle Pitts by just 3 receptions, finishing with 50 on the season and 582 yards. Now, we know that the Dolphins love getting yards after the catch. Tyreek Hill, one of the best in the game at doing so. Jalen Waddle, he can also make things happen when the ball is in his hands. This is where Smith fits into the Dolphins' plans. Over the last 3 seasons, Smith leads all tight ends in yards after the catch per reception. Yes, you read that right. That's not a typo. That's not me misspeaking. I mentioned Smith's 366 yards last season. That's also worth noting. Not to mention Mike Gesicki there. He was the top tight end for the Dolphins back in 2022 when he finished with 362 yards. Why do I mention these low outputs? Well, Smith, he had 379 yards last season after the catch. For fantasy, the best part about Smith in Miami is that he's no longer in Atlanta, and hopefully Kyle Pitts can ascend to the top of the fantasy throne at the tight end position. Smith, he's going to cost next to nothing when we're talking 2024 redraft leagues. Fire it up, see what fits there. He is a free play when it comes to fantasy. If you have a top talent already in that position, much like I mentioned here earlier on with Gesicki, it's worth taking a shot at Jonnu Smith as your number 2 option. I love him even more when it comes to best ball formats there. When you have a tight end that you select late, who's got that potential breakout any given week. Again, this deal is better for the Dolphins than it likely is for fantasy managers, but there is actually a path for success here for Smith that does not involve cutting into Hall or Waddle's production. I'll give this move a B-. Let's keep the good times rolling with the tight ends here. The Chicago Bears are pairing Cole Kmet with Gerald Everett after signing the former Chargers tight end to a 2-year, $12 million deal that could be worth up to as much as $14 million. Everett, he also gets a very healthy $6.2 million guaranteed. Everett, he will fit Shane Waldron's offensive scheme nicely, as the Bears are likely to use more 12 personnel this season, and he has spent time with Waldron in both Seattle and Los Angeles with the Rams. Everett's greatest attributes include his ability to break tackles and pick up additional yards after the catch. His 28 missed tackles since the start of the 2022 season are the second most amongst the tight end position. Last season, Everett finished with 4 touchdowns on 51 catches that led to 411 yards, averaging, here's a good one, averaging 5.4 yards after the catch. Let's be honest, there's not many tight ends out there that can rock the number 7 and a tinted visor the way Everett can. Everett is definitely an upgrade over Robert Tonyan, who did absolutely nothing. So serving as the second tight end this season, that is already an upgrade right there. And the addition here ends any kind of speculation the Bears could select Georgia tight end Brock Bowers if he were to be available at pick number 9. Trying to predict what the Bears are going to do in the draft gets a little bit easier with the addition of Everett and the thought of more 12 personnel being deployed. Caleb Williams will likely be the first player taken off the board there come April's draft, meaning the Bears would have Williams out there along with DJ Moore, DeAndre Swift, Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, perhaps one Roma Dunze. All in all, this is a great move for the Chicago Bears and what they hope to accomplish with their offense for Everett. His value is going to remain unchanged as he fits what fantasy managers are looking for in a second rosterable tight end. So this move gets a B- as well. Carolina, they're upgrading their offense for Bryce Young. Before free agency officially started, the Panthers, they made a move to get their franchise quarterback a little bit of help there in trading for former Pittsburgh Steeler Diontae Johnson. Along with Johnson, Carolina also acquires the Steelers' 7th-round selection. Heading back to Pittsburgh in this deal, cornerback Diontae Jackson and a 6th-round pick. For those who love IDP, Diontae Jackson, he's one of the best guys to have on your team because everyone seems to target him. And with Joey Porter Jr. already there, you know they ain't throwing at Joey Porter. Bryce Young, he was set to fail in his rookie season. Outside of a 33-year-old Adam Thielen, Young had no options in this passing game. In fact, you can watch pretty much any Panthers game out there right now, and you'll see that none of Young's targets were able to get any separation. Nobody was getting open, and that's one thing that Johnson has done exceptionally well throughout his career. In each of the last 4 seasons, Johnson's success rate versus man and press coverage has been well over 75%, and his success rate versus zone coverage even better at 82.8%, being the worst over that 4-year period. Last season, Johnson managed to catch 51 passes on 87 targets for 717 yards, despite some inconsistent play at the quarterback position. That's probably putting it mildly. However, the previous 3 seasons, it saw Johnson targeted 144 times, 169 times, and 147 occasions, meaning, guess what? He's getting open. So if Bryce Young can see over his offensive line, he's going to be able to see Diontae Johnson with nobody around him. Johnson, he may not be a true number 1 wide receiver, but Carolina, I'm sure they ain't done yet. They brought in head coach Dave Canales there, who did wonders for Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield. They beefed up that interior of that offensive line with Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis, which in turn should lead to more success for both Bryce Young and Diontae Johnson in 2024. I'll give this move a B+, as it finally looks like the Panthers are looking to help their young quarterback. Now, low-key winners in all this, Pat Freiermuth there, it's going to open up more targets for him in Pittsburgh. Last season, Freiermuth, he caught 63 of 98 targets for 732 yards. Now, after this move, I would expect Freiermuth to see an additional 2 to 3 targets per game. George Pickens, he also wins here. Without Johnson, Pickens saw a 28.6% target share. He averaged 3 yards per route run, and he finished with more than 16.5 fantasy points per game over that 4-game stretch. Now, I doubt he's going to be in that 25% target share, but his fantasy value is trending upwards as well this offseason. And the final big name that we're going to talk about here right now, Calvin Ridley, bets on himself and he inks a 4-year, $92 million deal with the Tennessee Titans that includes $50 million guaranteed. Now, Scott Barrett there of Fantasy Points, he kind of pointed out this kind of seems kind of fishy here, because we all expected the Jacksonville Jaguars to be there. We expected the New England Patriots. They were the betting favorites, but somehow a team at plus 1,800 ends up landing Calvin Ridley. I mean, the no state tax, the $50 million guarantee, that all goes well nicely there. But hey, riddle me this, riddle me that. It seems a little off, if you ask me. And maybe this is just because I really wanted him to return to Duval County. Ridley joins fellow free agent signee Tony Pollard along with DeAndre Hopkins, Tajay Spears, and Treylon Burks to give second-year quarterback Will Levis some much-needed offensive weapons heading into 2024. Tennessee's passing offense averaged 180.4 yards per game. That was the 4th fewest in the National Football League. And sadly, that was an improvement of where they were at in 2022 when they averaged a lowly 171.4 per contest. Ridley, he returned to the NFL after missing the entire 2022 season and most of the 2021 campaign, posting 76 receptions, 1,016 yards in 17 games with the Jacksonville Jaguars, averaging 13.4 yards per contest. And let's be honest, the Titans' thought process here, we have a horrible offense, we need playmakers, and Ridley did produce when the Titans and the Jaguars went head-to-head last season, scoring 3 touchdowns and adding 209 yards in those 2 games. Ridley's fantasy prospects are directly linked to Will Levis taking that second-year leap. We also know that if Will Levis struggles, then neither Hopkins or Ridley will live up to their current ADPs. However, if Levis can take that next step, then it is possible that Ridley could be a top 10 to 15 fantasy wide receiver for the 2024 season. Per Next Gen Stats, Ridley was more effective when teams decided not to press him, gaining an average of 2.3 yards per target when not pressed versus being pressed. So that is something worth monitoring for fantasy managers and for NFL teams. If we know we got a team out there that is going to press him off the line of scrimmage, it may be one of those weeks to fade Calvin Ridley. This is a great move for the Titans, great move for the development of Will Levis. For fantasy, I can't say that I'm in love with this move. Even with Trevor Lawrence having a down year last season, the drop-off from Lawrence to Levis, it is quite noticeable. But what this move does do, it allows the Titans to take wide receiver off their draft board at pick number 7 and give Levis some help along that offensive line. Really, he had to compete for targets there with Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram last season, and he's going to have to do the same with DeAndre Hopkins this season. And this season, he's turning 30. Hey, I'm no ageist here, but 30 is getting a little bit up there for a wide receiver. I give this move a B- for Ridley. I'm old enough to remember when the Tennessee Titans refused to pay A.J. Brown $100 million over 4 years. Maybe the magic number really was 92, but hey, who am I to judge? Now, when we take a look at what's still out there in free agency and what we got to talk about here, let's talk about the quarterback position here real quick. Some of these other quarterbacks that have been signed already and they've come off the market that we haven't really necessarily talked about right now. We've got ourselves Mitch Trubisky. He's going from Pittsburgh to Buffalo. Drew Lock, Seattle to New York. We've also seen Jameis Winston. He's now going to be the backup quarterback there in Cleveland, while Joe Flacco, he's actually heading to Indianapolis. Tyrod Taylor, hey, we heard Woody Johnson talking about the Jets needing a quality backup quarterback. Well, guess what? Tyrod Taylor happens to be that guy heading to New York. Other quarterbacks that are still looking to be signed right now, Ryan Tannehill, Jimmy Garoppolo, Ty Huntley. These are guys that could possibly come in there and be a number 2 option for a team, especially a team that grabs themselves a young quarterback in the draft or is working with one right now. Now, the running back position, if we take a closer look at all this, we know all the big names. We talked about all the big names between part 1 and part 2. The only other name that really comes to my mind right now is Chase Edmonds. He's returning to Tampa Bay. As far as running backs still on the market, Alexander Mattison, Ezekiel Elliott, they're still there. Donta Foreman, Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, Kareem Hunt, Rashad Penny, A.J. Dillon. Jerry Jones kind of seems like a thigh guy, doesn't he? So maybe A.J. Dillon finds himself in Dallas at some point. Those are some of the bigger names there at the running back position. Now turning our attention here to wide receiver. The wide receiver market hasn't exactly busted out here yet. We talked about some of those big names. The other ones right now, Mac Hollins, he's going from Atlanta to Buffalo. That's probably the next biggest sign that we haven't talked about. Noah Brown, he's returning to Houston. That means Mike Williams, who was just cut by the Chargers, he's available. Hunter Renfrow, he's available. Curtis Samuel, Odell Beckham Jr., Tyler Boyd, Michael Thomas, who was basically cut with a June 1st designation because he filled his physical, he's available. DJ Chark, he's available. Allen Robinson, well, I don't even know if he was available last season when he was playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We also have Paris Campbell, Mecole Hardman, Josh Reynolds, Marquise Hollywood Brown is probably the biggest name to keep an eye on here the next couple of days. Now, when we look at tight ends, well, let's see what we got here available here at the tight end position. The market wasn't really kind of flowing for them here. There wasn't a whole lot of big names. We know that Irv Smith Jr., he's going from Cincinnati to Kansas City. Austin Hooper, he's going back to New England. Logan Thomas, he's available. CJ Uzomah, he's available. After that, there's really not a whole lot that you can look here in the tight end that makes a lot of sense. Make sure that you are tuning in here to the Vipers Network each and every week to catch the latest fantasy football and NFL news. See you next time.